Have you ever wondered just how designers and publishers, printers made advertisements and posters and other graphics before we had graphics software like Photoshop or even like Word? We all know about like Gutenberg and the beginning of the press, letterpress, and making these complex pages with pieces, but also, a couple hundred years later or less, you've got people churning out compositions every day that have text, images, layers, and they get to the page, get to the printer, and come out in the newspaper in the morning. No computers in sight. How do they do it? Obviously I have the answer, and it's hiding just off screen. If you're 40 years old, any older than that, you probably already have the answer. If you're not, you might look at this thing and be like, what? But what is it? And that's because this is just another one of those technologies that rapid rise, it was everywhere, used for so many purposes, and then suddenly a new technology, in this case digital, replaced it overnight. But I think it'll be fun to take a look at this thing together, whether or not you're familiar with it. You ready? Dun, 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 dun. What I'm holding is Letraset Instant Letter. This is exactly the tool for the job. This is what designers, secretaries, really anyone who needed to add clean, crisp letters to a composition would use before we had digital software to help us do that, which of course is a lot faster, and you'll see why. If you're amongst the group of millennials that missed out, you're in luck, because in this video I'm going to explain exactly what this stuff is, how it works and how to use it, and then we'll lay down some letters together, and I have a couple cool examples of Letraset in the wild that I would love to show from some old publications and also some recent reimaginings of what this technology can do. Let's talk Letraset. So what exactly is it that makes the magic happen on this sheet of Letraset? It looks pretty flat, but there are actually 4, sometimes even 5 other layers, and you can kind of see the difference when I pull this back. You can kind of see that there's a bit of a shine to that black, and that's a sign of the adhesive that's on there. There's actually adhesive on both sides of the layers. So I kind of wanted to just use a couple of pieces of paper to show you how they stack up and exactly how they work. So this polyethylene sheet, the main sheet you buy, called the carrier sheet, is going to be that first layer. And on top of that is a pretty light adhesive that is pretty much just there to keep the letters on until you're ready to push them off. Then you've got the letters or design or whatever it may be, and these are facing away, so you kind of understand the direction, and that is what's going to have the magical pressure sensitive adhesive that Letraset innovated that goes just on top of the shapes that want to transfer, right? And that is when you push on it, it releases, and that was sort of the new idea that Letraset came up with, and then many others later on would copy. And then that all being one sheet, you always want to keep it against a protective backing tissue, because otherwise it can just press onto really anything. But this sort of waxy tissue does not really respond to the pressure sensitive adhesive. So that's pretty much how it all works. And the only addition I would make is that this layer where the pressure sensitive adhesive is, sometimes in between that and the ink will be what's called a halo, and that's in the case of images, especially color images. There will be a halo that makes it so there's even opacity behind all the colors, so you don't kind of see the background of whatever paper you put it onto, but you wouldn't see that on this sheet. The standard lettering is those 4 layers and then your protective backing tissue. As I may have mentioned, there was a time when Letraset was pretty much everywhere. All kinds of people were using it. That could be the editor of your local church newsletter, Hey Peg, or it could be a high-powered ad man on Madison Avenue getting something to press right before deadline. It's simple, and that's what makes it so powerful. And so I want to talk a little bit about exactly how it works, and then we can actually walk through it together. So essentially, each of these waxy sheets of paper were densely printed with designs, lettering, obviously, as I've shown you, but also shading patterns. Later on there were colorful decals and clip art and all sorts of stuff that they would put on this sheet that you could transfer down. Decorative frames, that kind of thing. You can just sort of select a part of the sheet that you want to put down, and you apply it directly onto the paper using a burnisher. So this is a funny one I found at a trinket shop that I've been using ever since, but most people just used a ballpoint pen. You can transfer down these letters or other designs onto lots of substrates, regular paper, but even metal, wood, and as you apply pressure, it'll peel off what's called the carrier sheet, that sheet with all the letters. So now we are going to put some letters down. So I'm going to try to be on the more precise side of things with this demonstration. Of course, lots of people like to just freehand it, and that can give it a kind of DIY aesthetic. But thinking about how it may have been used, I always start with a baseline. Pencil will do. Back in the day, they had this sort of special blue color that wouldn't show up on reproductions, but you know, a light pencil will come off as well. So there's a nice baseline. If you are also wanting to make sure your letters are standing tall and proud, you might want to make a cross line. If you have a square, that's better, but this should do as well. Actually, we'll do it like that. All right. If you wanted to center your letters, you could use that as a center point if you had aligned it as such, and even start with the middle letters from your word and work your way out. But we're just gonna go left to right here, and what I think is so we're just gonna go left to right here. If you selected your typeface and your size, make sure it's the right one for whatever you're using. If there's already an image in there, you want to make sure it's going to fit. So just imagine it or move it around to get a sense of where everything's going to go. If you've got this baseline, these little dashes on the bottom of every line here, which is called the Space-Matic system, it's very futuristic, to also mimic the baseline. These also help you space the letters out if you are trying to be real perfect. So take a look at your transfer sheet, make sure it's not super dirty on the back. You don't want to get these wet because moisture is not the friend of a Letraset sheet, though nor is dryness. This looks okay, no dust, but you can always wipe it down with a paper towel or a microfiber cloth, and yeah, good to go. And I find the best technique is to start with the edges of the letter and then work inward. The edges are normally the trickiest part, and if it's an old sheet, sometimes they don't go down. And you really want to use a light touch because too much pressure is going to crack it, or it might not even want to go down because this pressure-sensitive adhesive likes a light pressure. So let's start here. Yeah, hoping you can see that. So let's say I'm starting with R here, got it there in my line, and I tend to use the stencil backing sheet that these always come with, the stencil paper or, you know, protective sheet, tissue sheet, whatever you want to call it, just to block out the other stuff that I might accidentally rub down with if I lean too hard on it or stray too far with my burnisher, which in this case is a classic bone folder, but like I said, a ballpoint pen or really something you find in your house, a spoon, all of those will do, as long as you can get a nice even light pressure. So starting with the edge, and you can already see the transfer here is a little gray. It's coming off of the carrier sheet. That's a good sign. It means it wants to go onto the substrate, and we're just gonna, I just do like little circle motions, make sure I hit all those edges, and boom, and then gently peel it up, and don't move too fast because you might have missed a spot, which it looks like I missed just a tiny dot right here, but it'll go right back into place. Now, peel it up, looks pretty good, and now this is super important, you gotta burnish it down on top again because that's gonna really make it finally adhere. Remember that on the top of this, sorry, that on the back of this stuff is that pressure sensitive adhesive as well as the carrier adhesive. Pushing it down secures it into place. That said, if you make a mistake, a little masking tape can help you out, but this looks pretty good to me. So now aligning the next letter is pretty key. So you can of course freehand it, but I'm going to use the Spacematic system as best as I can. So I want to actually take that R, and some people push down, those will transfer, those little dash lines. I find it kind of annoying to have those dash lines, but for the sake of it, we'll put this one down. There it goes. A little tricky, yeah. That's going to be that right edge of the first character, and then you'll have the next one on. These things are imperfect, but if you do them, you will get very nice placed letters. There you go. Like I said, if you see sort of that black turning gray, that's a good sign because it means it's releasing from the carrier sheet and about to adhere to the substrate below. But it's very easy to miss a spot or make a crack because these have not been built to age, and also a little bit too much pressure or not enough will do the thing. But that looks good. Alright. These are two different sizes. But that's alright, we're going to work with it. Now that we've made a mistake, I need to find some masking tape and we'll see if we can correct it. I've got a little bit of tape here. And this should do the trick, though I did already burnish that U down, so it's possible it's... Give it a little pressure, but not too much. And then peel this like at a very, very steep angle away from the paper. And that worked pretty well. So, let's go all caps. I don't like that mixed sizes. Put another one on, find that Spacematic dash, which makes a lot more sense now that, yeah, you just kind of align them in between. Let's try it. Now every sheet you get these days is hit and miss as to how well it transfers. This one's pretty good. Some of the other brands have aged better, I find, though that's hotly debated. I love my Zipatone, so that came out well. Using this backing tissue, you can pre-release the letter from the carrier sheet so that it comes down really easy. And that, you know, might be better for an application where you have to get something in a tricky spot or where the letters are giving you trouble. We'll get this O dislodged, but it won't transfer. Turning kind of gray because it's lifting. I'm really going light here. You can see the that pressure sensitive adhesive is pressure sensitive, so a little bit did come out. We'll fix that. There's my O. Like that. And we'll see if we can't recover that. Now, one of the fun things about Letraset is you sometimes gotta get creative, patch letters together to make a sort of Frankenstein version of whatever you wanna make. So for that O filling in the gap, I'm not gonna worry about getting it off from that same letter, but let's see if I have any fragments I can use. Yep. C. There you go. That's gonna be perfect. Rub it down. Yeah, there you go. So everyone gets the hang of doing this, and some people, you know, use the tissue paper, some people don't, some people do it freehand. I encourage you to get to know these and just keep them in a decently dry and cool place. Keep the backs clean, and they should last for a long time. All right, rub on, my friends. Back in 1961, when Dye Davies sort of launched Letraset with the Letraset company and released the first batch, these transfer sheets really, in that moment, were a total paradigm shift in the design world. And I'll tell you why. Because previous to that, letterpress and movable typepieces really were the way to get text blocks together for your composition for many years. There was also a whole legion of highly skilled and well-paid hand lettering professionals who would do your sign or your flyer or a newspaper or whatever with beautiful calligraphy. Anyone in Toronto might be familiar with the Honest Ed's old school department store, may it rest in peace, had tons of hand lettering all over the store, and they actually had a full-time hand letterer pretty much until they closed. But there are not too many of them left, and it's expensive, time-consuming, and if you aren't careful, you might end up with some really bad hand lettering. And here's an example of, when hand lettering goes wrong. So anyway, using type or hand lettering was a hassle, expensive, took a while. And there was another technology like immediately predating this kind of instant lettering, which was photographic lettering, which literally used the photography process to like arrange, expose, develop a series of letters. Finally, you'd have that arrangement that you could duplicate. It's a little bit of a hassle as well. But remember, this is all before laptops and phones were even things. Thanks to that simplicity and that ease of use, Letraset really gave designers a lot of flexibility and really opportunities to experiment in ways they hadn't been able to with, say, letterpress or hand lettering. It could be finicky and frustrating for sure when you make a mistake or trying to line stuff up. But it also could have the effect of really training your eye to sort of better judge spacing, alignment, tracking, kerning, and even though Letraset actually included little dashes on the bottom of each line of text to help you figure out the spacing, a lot of people, I think, learn to do it by eye. Home designers or people just doing this in an amateur way also came to develop those skills. When instant lettering came around, it really suddenly made that arduous task not only fast, but like fun, and opened up all kinds of new options for designers and also people like you and me. So I wanted to pull from my collection of publications, zines and things, publications where you can really see Letraset in action, as also to show just how much it democratized design to have this at your fingertips. So first I'll show the Black Panther Party newspaper. This is from 1969. Black Panther Party were super influential in the 60s in the struggle for racial justice, and one of the first things they did when they founded the party was start printing a newspaper. But I have a few ideas of where you'll see signs of Letraset use, like here. So this is a font called Profile, or Profile, I'm not exactly sure, and it's a block, sort of a decorative block type, and you can see it's very distinctive, and it is a super common Letraset choice. But they've done an amazing job here with the spacing, right? Like this was a gentleman by the name of Emory Douglas, who is cited here in the masthead as revolutionary artist and layout minister of culture. But you can see his work in these newspapers, and often Letraset. Again, here, this is Letraset typeface, and you can see a little bit of cracking, which more likely than it being the printing of the paper was in layout with rub-on lettering. And then a little bit later, 1972, this is Data Boy, which was a sort of pre-zine LGBT fun magazine based out of Los Angeles. Certainly there is some signs of rub-downs as well, so to speak. And you can see that right here. See that Y has got a little chunk out of it, and that is a classic sign of a bad peel-up job. Listen, some of those in there are peeling down for sure. Alright, and then one more, another LGBT historical publication, but this one's Canadian, is Perceptions, which was actually the longest running LGBT publication in Canadian history. But this is the first issue of Perceptions. Obviously, it's not an original. It's a reproduction I made from the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives. They have every issue. But this is a great example of somebody really just ready to get their message out. Maybe didn't take the time to perfect their spacing or their rub down or their baseline. But in a way, that just shows that it's a homegrown publication, that they weren't necessarily a part of the media that was in the mainstream. Of course, this is all typesetting that was done on typewriter, and they printed it on mimeograph, and later on printed it on copiers and digital, just like the rest of us. Letraset really was a world leader in typography, not just as the manufacturer, but as their own foundry and as sort of a cultural broker in a way of all of these different typefaces, and really push the medium of typography in a way that had not been seen before. Those years between 1961 and 1984 have been referred to as the golden age of Letraset, which to me is always, but it's true that they were really, really active in creating fonts, licensing fonts, and people really didn't see it coming. This Monotype, which is a big type foundry and company, didn't take them seriously when they came out, this whole transfer lettering thing. So they basically licensed their typefaces for free, or almost free, for pennies, and later came to regret that when Letraset became such a huge player. But they did design their own. They used a technology called RubyLift, which was basically a thin film that they used stencils or tools to cut into each letter for a typeface. And a point of pride for a lot of people who worked at Letraset at the time was to brag that all of the stencils were cut by hand, but there are some other experts who are not so sure. Typographer and Letraset lover Dan Radigan, who I definitely recommend checking out some of his writing and talks on Letraset. He says that he has pointedly asked people who worked at Letraset if, for instance, Robert Excofon's Calypso, which is very trippy and lots of tiny dots and things, was actually cut by hand from RubyLift, which would be really hard. And he says, I've gotten an evasive answer every time I tried to get them to say that that wasn't the case. To me, it doesn't matter if they cut it straight from the RubyLift or not. What matters is that they were just creating and sharing and trying new things with type. And so I wish I had that sheet. But I do have some awesome typefaces that were used by Letraset, some of which were created there, or others which were licensed. And so maybe we can take a look, because it's kind of a cool historical mishmash of type design history here. And so I don't have any particularly exquisite examples to share, but I wanted to show a few different sort of categories and families that just will show you the range of what they were working with and still are if you can get your hands on them. So, of course, Futura, one of the most famous, used, and copied typefaces in the world, which was designed by Bauer in the 20s, I believe. This is a Futura Bold, and you can see here somebody has used a ballpoint pen, again the preferred choice for some people to burnish. But this is, one of those sans serif fonts that you would see for a title or for a poster image with a big phrase on it. Oh, of course, everybody loves, especially now, good old Helvetica. Now this is a Helvetica Bold Italic, so I love it even more. A lot of branding these days uses Helvetica and other sans serif fonts. You can kind of see these rub downs, you can see the edges didn't quite go down. So this sheet had a rough life. So Letraset had all kinds of other sans serif fonts, Universe and a few others that were quite common. But they also trafficked in serifs. A really nice serif font, but you can see got really messed up. And I'm really not sure how, because these pieces of the ink and the adhesive just kind of like mushed together over here, but they seem fine in the middle. Yeah, because it's got these really wide, pointy serifs. But that also means you can really connect them and guide a reader's eye across. You'll see it's called Tiffany Medium, and that's because it was the typeface used by Tiffany & Co. But the trade secret is it's not actually called Tiffany. It is called Baskerville, which is also a very famous typeface. You'll also notice this sheet is a Letra Graphica sheet, which was a line of Letraset sheets meant to be more experimental or maybe highbrow, but maybe that also caused it to fall apart over here. I don't know. Then, next I've got one that may be familiar to some people from their high school textbook in the 70s. This is Souvenir, or Souvenir Bold, which a recent article I read claimed was the Comic Sans of the 70s, which I think is kind of cruel. I think it's a little bit nicer. And I think a better description of it would be Alan Haley, who is a historian of type, said that Souvenir looks like Times New Roman dipped in chocolate, which is like, he must really know his way around type if he can come up with such a perfect description. Anyway, put that on your varsity jacket. This one is not actually a Letraset sheet. It's by Geotype, which was a competitor that came out. And this is a sort of Gothic or a black letter typeface, all caps here. So this is what I'll be using to give myself really cool tattoos, of course. A little bit gonzo in its approach to the black letter, like it kind of went off the rails, I think, with some of these serifs and weird lines, but that's what you want if you're going to use a hardcore typeface like this, which is really based off of the handwritten texts of medieval monks and the like, so that's why it looks so serious. Another decorative typeface that is kind of a mystery to me because it doesn't have a name on it is this guy here, and it's really funky, kind of an alien looking thing, and I had another sheet of this in a smaller size that definitely has a name on it, but I don't know where it is. And you can see it's got this kind of like pseudo serif corners. Take a closer look at the negative space here inside the O's surrounding the S's, and you'll see a lot of those horizontal lines. Lots of this flat plane. So W especially is really tight. And last, I just wanted to show off a few little sort of novelties. Here, for instance, I lucked out with a sheet of white Letraset, and I'll say these are much rarer, but you would use these on a darker background. And Universe was designed by Adrian Frutiger, and very similar to Helvetica and those other sans serifs that are neo-grotesque styles that were popular in the 50s and 60s and still very popular today. This is from the Letratype series, and these are just dots for your dotting needs. You know, bullet points or decorative. You might not use these as a pattern because they're so far apart as a shading pattern in a composition, but if you're bold, you can do anything. I believe in you. And then this one's really funny. Let me peel it out of its sleeve here. Letraset symbols. This just looks like a bingo hall and a half here. These are all numbers with circles in them, and I have no idea exactly what they were meant to be used for, nor who decided to lay them out this way, which is left to right in order, but they don't line up in such a way that they're anywhere near the same number on the line above. So it's really confusing and kind of fun to use these. And these ones transfer pretty well. This one's from 1980, so, 40 years later and we're doing all right. Like all major technologies in history, Letraset has, or had, a life cycle and, eventually became obsolete or at least marginalized. You guessed it. Digital design came knocking and most of us never looked back. Keyboards are pretty easy, comparatively, if less satisfying. When Apple released the Macintosh in 1984, which was one of the first home computing systems, it also introduced the first widely available computer typesetting and composition tools. And so physical processes like instant lettering, image transfers, were just rendered more or less irrelevant. So Letraset was smart. Throughout the rest of the 80s, they digitized their typefaces and started putting out other products like markers, Pantone markers. But slowly but surely, after changing hands and really no longer having their flagship item, Letraset ceased to exist, and I think it was 2018 where the last item with Letraset brand was released. That said, there are people who are making rub-on transfers, and more of the scrapbooking world that you might find them. I found these in a dollar store in suburban Pennsylvania. I have yet to try them, but typically these are not quite the same quality, but clearly there's still some appetite for them because you want to put a cactus in your calendar. But my new Letraset acolyte, have no fear. We are not stuck in the dollar store craft aisle forever. You can still get Letraset and other dry transfer lettering, instant lettering sheets on eBay. I really lucked out on Facebook Marketplace and got a bunch of them, and there are other folks who trade these and the image decals that Letraset made, the action transfers. So if you're lucky, or if you go searching, you can pull these up, and a lot of people are doing that, myself included obviously, and have been since Letraset closed. There's always been some enthusiasts, and the way I really come into it, or first encountered Letraset, is through zines. So zines are essentially self-published publications, mini magazines, DIY, pamphlets, brochures, comics, you name it. And if you're not familiar with zines, you're about to get to know some. But a large part of the history of zines comes out of a sort of do-it-yourself punk, don't tell me how to make my art aesthetic and attitude. And that kind of is perfect for Letraset because, especially now that it's aged a bit, you will get mistakes and you will get cracking, especially if you freehand it. And so I want to show you a couple zines that demonstrate that. A DIY approach, and this one is a great example of a recent zine that still uses those analog technologies like Letraset and really leans into that aesthetic as part of its ethos. So this is called The Secret of the Moon's Rotation. Don't ask me why it's called that. By Dave Tiggy out in Calgary, Alberta, where I think he was in Medicine Hat for a long time. And these pieces of text I don't think he would have done, and he does a lot of really cool photocopier art, which is another beloved tool of the zine subculture. But these are definitely some Letraset letters. I'm not actually sure the typeface, some sort of very stoic sans serif. Pardon. So these are definitely Letraset letters. I'm not sure the typeface. It seems like a sort of stoic early sans serif or something. I'll have to look it up. But what I find especially interesting is you can see, yes, there's splotching, but that's also because white Letraset, which does exist and is a little bit trickier and hasn't aged as well, has a lot more tendency to give that kind of streaking. Now inside, I don't think there's too much more in the way of Letraset, a lot more cut and paste, but I find it very charming that he used that on the cover. Some zinesters imitate the style using stamps, but I know Dave and I'm pretty sure he did the proper rub down. Now, I want to show another zine, and this one's kind of a curious case, because it is by Dan Radigan, who I mentioned earlier, who is a famous typographer and worked at Monotype. This is Pink Mints, this is his zine, and it's sort of his side project, and this one is actually all about the typography of adult magazines. He's removed all of the images from the covers, and it's pretty amazing. This one that says Campfire, that is Calypso, which is the highly debated as to whether it was hand cut to make the original stencil. Jury's out on that one, but clearly the adult magazine industry also benefited. There's profile again from the Black Panther Newspaper and a bunch more. So just wanted to show off. This is a little bit higher higher production quality than your average zine, But it's also documentation of how people use this. Rub down technology. So instant lettering lives on. Okay. Keep it rolling. Can you pass me that with the pile on the stool? If you're interested in talking about Letraset lettering or anything else, feel free to shoot me an email or a message here. I can clearly talk about this stuff for a long time.